January 7th really was a fucking garbage day. Because yesterday, a United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent fatally shot a 37-year-old woman identified as Renee Nicole Good, a U.S. citizen in Minneapolis, Minnesota, during a large federal immigration enforcement operation. Federal authorities described the incident as one in which the agent fired in self-defense after the woman allegedly tried to use her vehicle as a weapon. President Donald Trump and Department of Homeland Security officials have framed the incident as defensive and tied to violence against officers. They've labeled her a domestic terrorist. But there are a lot of local officials, eyewitnesses, community leaders, and experts who have publicly disputed the federal account. These sources are saying that video and testimony from the scene do not support the narrative of a clear and immediate threat that would justify lethal force. On its face, I'm deeply concerned by this incident. This person was a U.S. citizen who was not a target of any criminal enforcement action. Killing a legal resident under these circumstances was always going to raise alarms about due process and the boundaries of immigration enforcement powers. So, I don't see how anyone can be surprised that there's pushback. The administration has been escalating its deportation program in ways that are clearly designed to be provocative. And that's the point. Isn't it interesting that the self-imposed guideline of removing the most dangerous and extreme criminal elements has been almost completely discarded in favor of scaremongering and blatant racial profiling? Make no mistake, the president has a mandate to export illegal residents. I get that. People who didn't vote for him don't have to like it, but they will have to accept it. You'll get your chance to weigh in during the next election. That chance will be here sooner than you think. But I do believe that entry into this country should be predicated on a legal process. If you want to be a resident, if you want to become a citizen, avail yourself of that process. Don't jump the border. But if immigration enforcement raids lead to the accidental detainment, deportation, or killing of authentic American citizens, which they have, then it's going too far. I understand why there are folks on the left who think that enforcement of the law seems to mean going after anyone who is brown. Because when you're causing indiscriminate chaos that leads to these tragic mistakes and then don't correct for it in any way, then that's exactly what it looks like. For their part, federal officials have made the assertion that the agent acted out of fear for personal safety. The allegation is that the woman weaponized her vehicle. But Minneapolis leadership is disputing this in the strongest possible terms. The mayor says that the available video footage doesn't show a vehicle being used aggressively against officers, or anyone. Even going so far as to call the federal narrative garbage. There's a discrepancy here that underscores a breakdown in trust between federal and local authorities. And because we live in an era where America seems determined to eat its own and cannibalize itself on every little fucking thing, that trust may never be found again. Remember, this is a shooting that happened amid a broad crackdown. Placing heavily armed teams in densely populated urban neighborhoods increases the risk of miscalculated confrontations and civilian deaths. Any law enforcement officer has the right to defend himself from grave injury with lethal force, and they're obligated to do so when the stakes also include protecting other citizens. But we need to see the evidence. The evidence needs to match the narrative that federal authorities are selling. Because if there's no credible evidence, then the assumption is that we're just meant to accept that any actions they take at all are completely justified no matter who is deported, injured, or killed. And I do not support that. A sovereign nation must be able to maintain its own borders and enforce the law. That's not a question. But these operations have been so needlessly militarized and poorly calibrated that it's guaranteed we'll see more accidents unless something changes. Mark my words, you can enforce the law without using it to beat and kill your own citizens. Local police and some law enforcement analysts have indicated serious questions about whether the use of lethal force was proportionate or necessary under standard policing protocols. All you have to do is look at other cases involving federal agents. There are many times where independent analyses have often concluded that similar shootings could have been avoided with different tactics. Even in previous ICE shootings, investigations have criticized federal officers for putting themselves in positions of danger and responding with extreme force rather than de-escalation. Again, the official justification is self-defense. DHS leadership and the president himself maintain that the agent acted in self-defense after the woman allegedly attempted to use her vehicle as a weapon. This is the basis cited for firing. Let me repeat myself. In U.S. law enforcement practice, officers are legally justified in using deadly force if they reasonably believe they or others are in imminent danger of serious bodily harm. And there's no question that these men and women operate in a high-risk environment. Federal immigration enforcement duties that involve operations where agents are outnumbered or potentially confronted by hostile crowds are inherently high risk. Officers in these situations are often confronted with making split-second decisions to protect life, which would justify the use of lethal force in the appropriate circumstances. I want to make it clear for those people in the back who might be prepared to take some of what I've said out of context. Any officer of any law enforcement agency has the right to defend himself and the obligation to protect others when the threat of extreme harm is imminent. I'm not here to attack cops or ICE or anyone who puts their lives on the line to keep the rest of us safe. My concern is with just how imminent the threat really was in this case and in the others that will surely follow. I think that's fair. Skepticism is normal and healthy, and until it's answered with clear, irrefutable evidence, I'm obligated to maintain that skepticism. The legal framework used to justify self-defense in law enforcement is standard across all agencies, but the bar is incredibly high. It should be high. If the evidence reveals that you used lethal force when there were other options, or that there was no credible threat to begin with, then you need to be in a different line of work. And there are those of you out there who support the most aggressive immigration enforcement possible. I completely agree that federal agents must be empowered to act decisively to maintain law and order in the face of resistance, including when it comes to violent acts. It's not unfair to classify this shooting as a tragic consequence of broader challenges confronting immigration enforcement. And the other extreme, where we just leave the borders wide open and don't enforce anything at all, is completely unacceptable. My issue is with just how much aggression is required in sorting out who is a legal resident and who isn't. Do we really need to be enforcing the law so haphazardly that it creates circumstances where law enforcement officers find themselves killing American citizens? It's one thing if you're in pursuit of a dangerous criminal alien and your options are limited, but when you're rounding up illegals purely on the basis of their suspected status, shouldn't there be some discretion in how that process is utilized? Let's go over the basics just once more to wrap up. Local officials, civil liberties groups, and bystanders have pointed out that the video evidence does not clearly show the woman trying to injure officers with her car. The victim's family and community members emphasize she was not involved in violent resistance. The mayor, the governor, and other Minnesota leaders have alleged that federal escalation and lack of coordination inflamed the situation. They believe that it lends credibility to ongoing concerns about accountability, enforcement boundaries, and the risk of civilians being harmed in federal operations without adequate oversight. Federal authorities, like the president and the DHS secretary, they argue that split-second self-defense decisions and the high-risk nature of law enforcement can legally justify lethal force under U.S. standards. I agree with that. What I don't agree with is the idea that we should just take the administration at its word and accept that mistakes like this are a matter of consequence in executing enforcement of the law. The shooting involved a U.S. citizen with no confirmed criminal charges, and the use of deadly force under these circumstances raises all manner of constitutional and civil liberties questions. My bottom line is this. The absolute dick waving and how the Trump administration is going after non-criminals should give all of us some pause. I'm not upset that they're enforcing the law. I'm upset that they're going out of their way to enforce it with a level of incompetence and cruelty that seems to be about causing as much disruption as possible without any regard for a humane, efficient process. It is possible to deport illegal aliens without resorting to Gestapo tactics. And do we really need the President of the United States performing the verbal equivalent of pissing on the woman's grave by tweeting about it? But that's my take on it. I want to know what you think, even if you don't agree. Comment down below. I'm interested to hear other opinions. And if you appreciate the content, then please like, share, comment, follow, subscribe, and all of that other good stuff, because I'm always looking to grow my audience, interact with its members, and increase the viability of my channel. So doing any of those things would really help me out. Until next time.